Welcome back to Psychedelics Today with your host Kyle Buller and Joe Moore. This is Kyle. Joe will not be joining me on this episode today. I had the chance to travel to New York City, which really isn't that far away from where I'm at, but I got to go into the city and meet Stefanie Jones, who is the Director of Audience Development over at the Drug Policy Alliance. So I got to go hang out at the Drug Policy Alliance office down in New York for a little bit and chat with Stefanie. It was a really great time, had a fun time talking to her and just learning more about what she's doing. She's doing some pretty cool work with some drug education with adolescents, which I just found fascinating. So a little bit about Stefanie. In her role, she oversees communication and outreach to specific communities on drug use and drug policy topics, including on novel psychoactive substances and the DPA's youth drug education work. She personally runs the Music Fan program, which introduces harm reduction principles and drug policy alternatives to partygoers, public health officials, and city nightlife regulators across the U.S. In her prior role within the DPA as an event manager, she produced 4 progressively larger editions of the biennial International Drug Policy Reform Conference, as well as numerous local policy conferences, fundraisers, and coalition building meetings. And one other thing that Stefanie has been working on over the DPA is the Safer Partying program. So this is a program that is based around providing honest and accurate drug education, harm reduction for people that are attending music festival, concerts, and clubs. And one thing that we ended up chatting about in this episode and how this may differ from other drug education programs that are out there at festivals and concerts is that they might have drug information about the drug, but sometimes these pamphlets and little handouts that people get don't necessarily have some harm reduction tips and techniques on there. And so that's what they're doing with this program. So a little bit about this. So they have 4 goals in the Safer Partying campaign or program. The first one is ending stigma against people who use drugs at festivals, concerts, and clubs, amending the illicit drug Anti-Proliferation Act, most commonly known as the RAVE Act. And if you don't know what the RAVE Act is, it kind of just holds venue owners and stuff like that accountable if people are using drugs at an event. The third goal is making drug checking happen in as many places and forms as possible. And the fourth one is stopping the criminalization of partygoers. Punitive drug laws cause as much harm as the drugs themselves, and often more harm. Yeah, and so this is a really fun conversation that I had with Stefanie, and we also got into this other program about drug education for teenagers and adolescents or high schoolers. The DPA is launching this pilot study at a school. I believe Stefanie said it was in Brooklyn, but the program will have more honest information, accurate information about drugs and drug use. So much more different than DARE. Not trying to, really say don't do drugs and take this abstinence approach to drugs, but really just having like honest conversations about them. So I'm really excited to see how that pilot works, because I think that will be a really great thing for schools. I mean, if it, I don't know. I guess it's kind of a tricky thing to have honest conversations with teenagers about drug use. We know teenagers and adolescents are doing this stuff. We could take it as, a form of rites of passage. And how do we be really honest about it? This has always been like a really interesting conversation or just topic of mine, because I worked with adolescents for a bit, at-risk adolescents. So, I worked with a lot of kids using drugs and obviously having an interest in substances, trying to have honest conversations. I felt like I was sometimes walking on a tightrope of, what do I say? What can I say? So, I'm really excited to hear or keep an update on how this program has unfolded. And I think that's about it. We'll get on to ads and updates and all that stuff next. And I hope you enjoy this episode with Stefanie Jones from the Drug Policy Alliance. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the other side.
We wanted to take the time to thank our sponsor, Bluebird Botanicals. Bluebird Botanicals is an excellent CBD company based in the Boulder, Colorado region. And I actually personally know, I would say, 6 or more employees at that company. And one of my good friends decided they wanted to partner with us. And I've actually known these guys for a really long time, and I really trust the products. I think I even took it in 2011, if they were around at that point. It was really early days, and I started taking a CBD product. I thought it was bootleg. It's actually legal to take across state lines. I think I flew with it across the country because it doesn't have THC in it. It is legal, and it's legal in all states in the U.S. except for South Dakota. And I don't believe Bluebird can currently ship internationally, though I'm sure as soon as that's possible, they'll do it. It's a great company, a great product. If you don't know too much about CBD, I suggest you dig in and check it out. It is really cool and definitely something you should check out. I've been using it. My girlfriend's been using it. Kyle has been using it. And I kind of take it right before bed. And I find it helps me slow down at the end of the day. I'm a little speedy, so it helps me chill right out. Yeah, so that's it for Bluebird. Thanks to Bluebird for sponsoring us again. I really appreciate it. If you want to try psychedelic mushrooms in a legal setting in Jamaica with us, you still have some time to sign up. We've got a retreat coming up May 16 through 23 in Jamaica, and we still have room left. Applications keep coming in, but I'm pretty sure it's not sold out yet. So if you want to check it out, mycomeditations.com, and hit the application button there. You can learn more on the site, mycomeditations.com. And if you're interested and need some info from us, hit us up, Psychedelics Today, email at gmail.com. The trip will entail 3 mushroom sessions, 2 breathwork sessions, and a lot of kind of class time and plenty of time to relax because we are going to be in a very beautiful place in Jamaica. So check that out, and we'd love to have you if you're interested in coming. If you want to support the show with some small, regular donations, we have a Patreon site, patreon.com/psychedelics today, and you can give us a small monthly donation or donations by show. So check that out. You can give as little as $1 a month if you want to just help us out a little bit, pay the bills and keep the lights on, and just improving the quality of the show. In the near future, I think we need to buy some new microphones, and I think Kyle and I might need some new PCs to keep the editing going. So if you want to support us there, that would be lovely. Patreon.com/psychedelics today. Psychedelics Today has partnered with Daniel McQueen over at Medicinal Mindfulness on this new and very exciting project you've heard about on our show a bunch and maybe elsewhere, extended state DMT research. So the concept is to use a IV pump and keep a steady blood concentration of DMT in the bloodstream for an undetermined amount of time. Rick Strassman, I think, responded that he would like to try it the first time for a few weeks. Something silly like that, maybe just a week. But, I think the initial phases of the study will be maybe 20 minutes, 10 minutes, just to extend that blood concentration peak of DMT that you would get from a freebase or an insufflated dose of DMT. And it's more from a psychonaut perspective, which is interesting. It's not just for medical research. It's for our community. We want to know what happens. And you have an opportunity to participate. We have on our Teachable platform over at psychedelicstoday.teachable.com a class for sale called the DMTX Psychonaut Training. And it is the first step. If you want to be a candidate for this, you might have to really work. It's kind of like an astronaut program, like NASA grade kind of selection for participants. So check that out. Teachable is hosting our class, psychedelicstoday.teachable.com. Kyle and Daniel McQueen ran a multi-week class, and you can get the bulk of it there. And yeah, the class proceeds go to support the Psychonaut training and getting funding enough to push this through to make it legal to do in the States. So yeah, again, check that out, psychedelicstoday.teachable.com, and see if you want to pick up that class, DMTX Psychonaut Training. Finally here, if you want to support the show but can't afford to buy a t-shirt or a mug from our shop, feel free to just leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Facebook, anywhere really. Google. Tell your friends, share your favorite episodes with them, or maybe ask your significant other or parents for a seat to our class, Navigating Psychedelics, so you can keep yourself safe. So again, we'd love to have you tell your friends about the show or just plug us on your socials. Thanks again for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everybody, to Psychedelics Today. This is Kyle, and I'm here with Stefanie Jones, the Director Audience Developer over at the Drug Policy Alliance. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Kyle.
Yeah, so maybe give a little background, like who you are and what do you do here?
So I've been at the Drug Policy Alliance for a long time, almost 13 years. So I've done a bunch of stuff for them. But right now, in my current role, I love it. I get to develop programs and materials to bring specific audiences closer to drug policy reform information and the work that we do here. So today, I'm hoping to talk with you about two particular audiences that I work with. One audience is parents and educators. And another audience is people who go out and use drugs at clubs, festivals, and concerts.
Sounds awesome. Let's maybe jump into this Safety First program that you've been helping develop. So this is drug education for teenagers, right, and parents?
Yeah, that's right. So that's speaking to the parents and educators audience and goes back a long way at DPA, actually. So we had a woman who actually initiated our San Francisco office. Her name's Marsha Rosenbaum. She wrote this very famous letter to her son, who was at the time like 14, about to go into high school. It's the Dear Johnny letter. And it was really like, an outline of how we feel like most parents feel about their kids. Like they don't want them to use drugs, but they recognize they're out there, and ultimately they just want them to be safe. So she had put that out in the letter and was published in the San Francisco Chronicle, was really super popular, and people just kept asking for more. So she sat down and she wrote down this booklet, which she called Safety First. And it was a reality-based approach to teens and drugs. And it was sort of a guideline for parents about how to talk to their kids about drug use and staying safe, and introducing the concept of harm reduction. And this booklet has also been like crazy popular for us at DPA. We always keep it in print. We're always sending it out. And we've gotten a lot of questions over the years about like, okay, but what else do you have? Like, what about my kids who are in school? And we just, for a lot of reasons, didn't have the capacity to like grow beyond that. And it's been a really big privilege of mine to finally take that work and take the next step and put together a harm reduction based drug education curriculum for high school students.
That's so awesome. It's such needed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like we've had a lot of years in the drug policy reform movement of like saying DARE is terrible and DARE doesn't work, and that's backed up and researched bunches of times, but we haven't really had anything come along and take its place. And this is what I hope the Safety First curriculum is going to do.
Let me ask you a kind of a cliche thing, but how is this going to differ from DARE?
I would love to tell you.
Sweet.
First of all, DARE, like almost all of the drug education programs out there, is like an abstinence only basis philosophy. Like some of the programs are better than others. Some of them are less stigmatizing. They bring in other good things like, just giving, directing kids towards positive things to do, which is all great. But ultimately, they're carrying the message that you just should not do drugs. And they don't say anything about what happens if you do choose to use drugs. So the biggest difference of ours is that it's based in this harm reduction philosophy, which is we still introduce abstinence as a strategy, like as one of the strategies you can use. And in fact, the most effective strategy if you want to stay safe when it comes to drug use. Just don't do it. But if you're going to do it, here are some things that you should think about. Here are some things that you should do that will make your choices safer.
Do you have an example of that?
Gosh, there's a lot of examples.
Maybe for, say, since I guess our audience is psychedelic related, do you have any information of how you would talk to a teenager using psychedelics?
Yeah, so it's I think the harm reduction concept that we bring into this curriculum that I'm not sure is addressed in any other drug education program is set and setting. It's a classic for classic for psychedelic use, but really kind of applicable across the board. And so I think that's a really strong piece of our program is that we introduce these concepts and really explain how set and setting applies to psychedelic use, but also like to really any drug use.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Do you guys get into any like dosing information and stuff like that? Or is that a little controversial with the teenage population?
It's definitely controversial because we are designing this program for 14-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And that was just like a choice that we made. Like that was a nice, good age where to like lay down some foundational concepts. But it does make it tricky in like talking about dose information. So we made a choice to keep specific dose information out of the curriculum. But what we do is introduce the concept of dose and dosage. So we're teaching kids about what a dose means, what a dosage means, and how they apply to, for example, alcohol. We have an exercise, an activity where they have little cups and like glasses of water, and then the teacher says, how much alcohol do you think is in a beer or in a shot of liquor? And they have to like pour how much alcohol they think it is. So they learn this concept of like the same amount of beer is not the same as the same amount of vodka is not the same amount of wine. So that's kind of like introducing the concept without saying like this is this specific active dose for all of these different substances.
Yeah, it's tricky. And we were just kind of talking a little bit before. I mentioned that I worked with like at-risk teenagers, and this would always come up, and I just never really knew how to approach it. Working in a clinical setting, like how much information should I give them? But I always kind of took that harm reduction approach because like you're doing it anyways, might as well teach you a little bit about set and setting. And I would also talk a lot about testing, just because, once I started telling them that there were a lot of research chemicals floating around, people are like, oh, I didn't know that. That's, could be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the way that we've structured the curriculum, we have a couple of like foundational lessons to start. We have a conversation about what is a drug and understanding harm reduction and how neurotransmitters work. And then we get into drug classes, and there's a lesson that's specifically devoted to psychedelics. Mm. And in that lesson, we actually have not only do we talk about drug checking, but there's an activity that sort of underlines that concept that you're talking about. So another cool activity that we have is like the teacher makes 2 pitchers of like a colored beverage. One of them is like mixed with salt and one of them's mixed with sugar. Mm. And then the kids have to come up and decide which one they're going to drink from.
I'm guessing they picked the sugar one.
They're hoping they pick the sugar one, but it's kind of like an instructive thing because it's like, well, they both look the same. They're both like poured the same amount, but like you have no idea what's really in it. And so that's kind of introducing this idea that with illegal drugs, like you don't have an idea of what's in it, and that's risky. And so then when we talk to them about drug checking and how that works and why that can help you reduce harm, it really comes home to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think I've been really interested in like the teenage adolescent period just because of this concept of like rites of passages. And it's like just a time when kids are experimenting, trying to find out who they are as a person and, developing a sense of self. And it's like, yeah, where are they getting the information from? And is it just like, no, don't do it? But then what happens to the person that had a bad experience? Yeah, so I think it's really great work. And you said that the pilot is you're about to do a pilot in a school in New York?
Yeah, that's right. We've been working with this one high school in New York called Bard Early College High School. Really great school. We picked them because they have their racial and economic diversity sort of matches national averages. And they are also a school that emphasizes health education. So we're like, if we had to pick a school to try this out for the first time, Bard is a great choice. And so for the month of March in New York City, 4 times a week, there's a bunch of ninth graders at Bard that are going through these lessons, which is really exciting.
That is really cool.
Yeah. I've yet to like go check out like the classroom myself, but I think I'll be able to do that in the next week or so. And I'm just like so excited to see it happen.
Cool. So it will be a month-long program?
So the way it works is, and this is a best practice for health education, is that you have it not just in 1 or 2 sessions, but like multiple sessions. So our curriculum is actually 14 lessons long.
Okay.
So it kind of plays out differently depending on what school you're in. But at Bard, they have health like 4 times a week. So it's like 3.5 weeks.
Nice.
Yeah.
And how is that pitching that to that school? Were they open to the idea or were they a little cautious?
They were actually surprisingly open to it. I think we had the luck of like stumbling across a health teacher who already understood the concept of harm reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, anytime you talk to any educator about drug education that is at the least little bit progressive, they just are dying for something that is like different than most of the crap that comes across their desks. In fact, the best teachers usually develop their own curriculum. They just like make up their own drug education unit, because I think a lot of what's out there is really stigmatizing, and it's just still based in that like abstinence only mentality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is DPA going to be in charge of this? Or are you guys going to train, say, the teachers eventually to put on this?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a little bit interesting, right? Because DPA is a policy advocacy organization. So this is a little bit of a stretch for us, but it felt like a really necessary stretch. But nonetheless, we wanted to put together something that was, not dependent on us necessarily to have it, go out there and continue on. So we designed it so that it's going to be taught by the health teacher.
Oh, nice.
In the classroom. So it's not like an outside expert coming in, and it's not an after school program. It's like during the day in your health class, your 9th grade health teacher will deliver this curriculum. So hopefully that will make it more sustainable and more easier to reach a lot of different schools.
Yeah. And what is say one hope that you're hoping for with this program?
Oh man, I just hope it replaces DARE.
It's a pretty solid hope.
It's a pretty solid hope. I really like the least little bit that I start talking about this curriculum, people are really into it. So I think that's a good sign.
Nice. And then how do you think parents are going to take it?
So it's an interesting question. We were lucky enough with Bard to have a PTA meeting fall right at the beginning, right as we were starting the curriculum. And maybe, again, this is just one school and this is Bard, but the parents that were in the room were they were super into it. And they started asking questions like, well, why is this only 1 month? Why is this only for 9th graders? Can you have a session for parents so we know how to talk to our kids about what they're learning in the classroom? They were just very engaged.
Nice.
So that's what I'm hoping for. There was one parent that was kind of the holdout. She didn't speak up in the meeting, but kind of came to us afterwards. We've had parents that are concerned about the advocacy work that the organization does.
Right.
We want those legalizers coming into the classroom. It's all right.
But the teacher's teaching it, right? You just kind of trained them or gave them part of a curriculum.
It's true. It's the teacher that's teaching it, but it's also something that we did very intentionally, which was to keep our advocacy out of it.
Mm-hmm.
What we do, for example, is we have a 2-part lesson on marijuana. And we talk about the fact that some states have legalized for both medical and recreational use, but that focus of that whole 2 lessons is actually looking up sources and evaluating their credibility. So it's about, we recognize this debate is out here. People need information to know if they want to change the laws. So here, let's teach you how to evaluate information.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
A little rigor.
Exactly. Because ultimately, that's what you want. A lot of these drug education programs are measured on how much they change amount of drug use, before or after. That's something that they measure. X number of drugs were doing, or X number of kids were doing drugs beforehand, and that number was lowered afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
That's not actually something we want to measure with our curriculum. Ours is all about, does this young person have critical thinking skills? Does this young person know how to evaluate sources? Does this young person know where to look for information when they need it? Do they understand concrete strategies to stay safe? It's all about changing the way they think and behave when it comes to drugs, but not necessarily directly addressing drug use itself.
Right. Oh, I love that. Yeah, much different than Dare just cramming, this is all bad for you and you have to listen to us.
Yeah. And Dare has actually been shown to they have kids that take Dare and then they actually use drugs more than their peers that haven't taken Dare. So that's.
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up and it's like, oh my God, these things are so terrible. And then your friend started smoking weed or something. And then it was like, oh wait, it's not as bad as they were saying it was. And then, then you start progressing well, if that's not true.
Yeah. It was really important to us when we're going through the drug classes is to talk about both risks and benefits, because there are risks and benefits to all drugs and all drug use. So, and if you don't tell young people that, they'll find out. And then they'll know that you lied to them, and then everything that you put out there is suspect. So that was obviously a really guiding principle for us.
Yeah. And it's so tricky too, especially with the marijuana thing, since a lot of states are moving towards legalization. I would always kind of get into that when I was working with teenagers of it's legal in this state, and this state's about to be legal, so it's not as bad. And I'm like, how do you really shape that? How do you really talk to them about the risks and benefits?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to keep it balanced, right? It's some drugs, they tend to accrue positive values to them. I would argue that marijuana and psychedelics are classes of drugs that people have a lot of positive feelings around. I mean, there's obviously people have negative feelings, but there's a lot of positive feelings around this. And so it was important to us to if we're going to challenge the abundance of negative feelings, we have to challenge the abundance of positive and find the truth in there. Because we have people evaluate marijuana is safe because it's natural. We have a statement where they have to look up research and see if that's a true statement. And it's a lot of people out there truly believe that. And that's okay, depends on how you define safe and all this other stuff. You're not going to die from a marijuana overdose, but people can take too much. It's uncomfortable. There's other things that can happen. So it's opening up the subtleties for young people. They get all these messages thrown at them, and to teach them how to break that down and find the aspects of truth, I think is an aspirational element and goal of what we're trying to do with a curriculum.
Yeah. The natural argument is sometimes really funny because it's man, how many plants are out there that you don't want to eat or ingest that will kill you? It's natural, but it's not something you'd really want to take on.
Yeah. And in the psychedelics lesson, we had to make a point to be psilocybin mushrooms are, one type of mushroom. There's also mushrooms you eat that are not psychoactive, and there's also mushrooms you eat that are poisonous and will kill you, so stuff that it's just important for 14-year-olds to know.
And are you going over every drug class?
Well, we hit 5 of them. And so let me see if I can remember them. Depressants, stimulants, opioids, psychedelics. We had to when we introduced it, we're we're going to talk about, marijuana, of course. That's not
it's in its own little category.
I guess if we were proper, we would have said cannabinoids, but so we have those 5 and we introduced them and we're these are the 5 major ones we're going to talk about. There's more out there, but got to start somewhere.
There's this interesting drug chart online, and I don't know who made it or how accurate it is, but it has all those categories, and marijuana is in every category in some sense. It's almost it is its own little type of substance, because it is a stimulant, it's a depressant, it's this, it's that, or it has these different effects. So
it's true. It's true. That kind of information, where you show all the drugs and where they sort of relate next to each other, when you go, I don't want to say up a level, but when you go into a different audience, when I'm thinking about what to put out there for, festival goers and that sort of thing, that's the kind of cool information that I put out when I'm doing festival outreach work. It's here's all these drug classes and know how they relate to each other. And there's a great material that I use when I do on-site festival work. I'm sure folks on this podcast and you are familiar with it, but the Tripsit chart of drug combinations is golden. It's so popular. It's literally the most popular thing at festivals where I have it out. People will just look at that for minutes. They'll just stand there. They'll bring their friends over. They learn other substances as they're doing that. Marijuana is an interesting one because a lot of it is like, of course, yellow. It's like a caution sort of thing. They're like, kind of challenges that whole like, oh, is this safe? I'm like, well, actually, it has a lot of different effects, sometimes unpredictable, and certainly if you're mixing with other substances.
Yeah. Yeah. If anybody doesn't know what that chart is, look it up. I think it's just like TripSit. You can just TripSit chart.
Yeah, if you Google TripSit chart, you'll find it. The site is tripsit.me, which is fun.
Yeah. But it's this great chart. It has like almost every substance or drug, and it just shows you like the combination, whether it's safe to do, risks, and then like, danger, stay away from it, cause death or whatever else.
Yeah. So it was really very popular thing. So I've made reference to the festival work I do. So I actually started doing that work first, the safer partying work. That's what I call the work around festival goers and nightlife attendees, safer partying campaign. So I started out with that work just being my own background, being one of those people myself, and just being like, this community is so in need of information and resources. And to be honest, it's not a community that gets it very much because so much of the drug use in those spaces is not problematic. I mean, there's risks involved and some of it is problematic, but it's not problematic in the same way that like when we talk about the opioid overdose crisis and we're talking about like that level and that type of drug use. It's a little bit different. So there weren't a lot of resources and I was like, we need to have resources here. And obviously I work with great partner organizations in the field like Dance Safe, that has a long history in the electronic music community and showing up at festivals and putting out drug education. Zendo Project, which does psychedelic harm reduction, peer support, as I call it for more mainstream audiences. But it's really, that's where I started doing a lot of the audience work and developing some of the drug education and harm reduction materials that are out at festivals today.
Cool. And you said like you guys do, you hit like different festivals than say Zendo, which is more transformational. You guys are more in the EDM scene and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So the partnership that I have developed is with a company called Insomniac. They're based in California and they do electronic music and big like mainstream stuff, younger crowd as well. And I have to admit, I came up in their events. And so it's like very satisfying to be able to go back and be like, I always felt this was a need at the time and like to see it happen and to help make it happen is really great. But I partner with Insomniac to put together this service called Project Open Talk. Been working with them the last 2.5 years. It's not at every one of their festivals, but it's at their major ones. And the idea is to have a place within the festival where they can attendees can come and get drug information, sexual health information, and if they're having a difficult time, there's somebody there who's trained to like provide peer support. And so I've partnered with a company called Healthy Nightlife, which is run by Missy Wooldridge, who used to run Dance Safe for a while.
Okay, cool.
And I also partner with Zendo Project, of course, to like bring in their expertise on the peer support element. So it's been an interesting process because to my knowledge, it's the first time we've tried to bring all those different kinds of services together into one space and one group, one sort of Project Open Talk overarching thing. And it's been a learning experience too, because it's a new community.
Yeah.
And different messages sort of resonate differently.
And do you have like some of the different chapters attend those events? Is that how that works? Because you obviously don't go to all these things doing promo stuff, right?
I actually do travel to the festivals quite a lot.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah. So I don't know how I convinced DPA to let me do that, but
that's awesome.
But I do some on-site festival work. So I'll travel out to these festivals and coordinate a group of volunteers, some of which we bring in. So DPA through Healthy Nightlife will hire some people. Zendo will hire some people. But part of our idea with this is for it to be sustainable within Insomniac. So they bring their own group of workers that they hire. They have already this existing service called Ground Control, which is just young people that sort of walk the space and keep an eye out for any issues. Like they're kind of like customer servicey, but they're also like trained to identify when there's a medical issue or whatever. So there's this great bunch of young people, super enthusiastic, really like giving and just like the best the best young people, like the friend you want to have
Yeah.
at a festival, like the person who always knows where the parking lot is and like where the shortest water line is and like, you know, where to get this or that or who's on at this stage. It's like your best friend. So we work with these people who have been on ground control and then train them how to do drug education outreach. And in some cases, we train them to do the peer support.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Is the peer support model kind of based off of some of the Zendo stuff, or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've had, and you should probably talk with Sarah who runs Zendo because she can expound on this even more, but we've had to adapt some of the practices because just the environment is different. Like you have people that are coming in, most of them are not camping festivals. So you have people coming in for like much shorter amounts of time. And it's just like a lot of people. Yeah. So we've had to like kind of have a strategy about like not having somebody sit one-on-one necessarily for like hours at a time, but like sit one-on-one for a shorter amount of time or sit for a longer period of time, but kind of like check in on 2 or 3 people. So it's been an interesting process, and I won't say it's at all finished. It's definitely like in development. It's ongoing. But I think it's really exciting because I've, you know, been in the transformational festival scene myself. I work with Lightning in a Bottle and have worked with them to, you know, enhance their messaging around harm reduction. And I was really happy to be able to bring Zendo principles into like a different community and a different scene because it's so valuable, right? And it's like you want it to be everywhere. So I'm hoping we get to keep doing that.
Yeah. What's, say, one main concern or issue that you've been seeing in the festival scene regarding like drug use or whatever that is?
Particularly in electronic music or generally?
Well, yeah.
That's a tough one. I mean, honestly, with Project Open Talk specifically and the audiences we see, like they're so young. Like they're literally like 18 coming to their first festival. And just, again, like going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, like they've had probably little or crappy drug education. And then they maybe or maybe not look up something online that may or may not be accurate. And then they come up to this festival, super excited. Friend gave them something that they don't know very much about. Like that's like a lot of times your entry point. We get a few people who come up who are like the experts and like want to jam on like information, but we get a lot more who are like, this is my first festival. And like, what's this? What's ketamine? Like, what's, you know, anything. Like there's just almost like a blank slate sometimes when it comes to drugs. And we actually see a lot of not always active duty, but people who have spent time in the military who come through these festivals. And they have a very interesting relationship to the festivals themselves and drug use. Like some of them are just like not at all, but they like support the harm reduction and the outreach. Some people are like, this is where I go to like be free, but I can't say anything to anybody because I could get in so much trouble for this. And some people are like clearly dealing with like some trauma.
Yeah. They're trying to get past.
Yeah. So like it's an interesting mix of people, and like the need for the education and harm reduction is certainly clear every time.
Yeah. This was kind of random, but I just saw that somebody posted, a tweet, Jesse Jarno, I believe, who wrote Heads. He tweeted that in Canada, they just found blotter with carfentanil on it. So it was Albert Hoffman blotter paper, but I guess they found carfentanil on it, tested as positive, that's so sketchy, knowing that like that stuff is getting on like in acid tabs, or even if it is, maybe it's just all opioids.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's definitely changing the whole conversation. And like from a general drug policy perspective, like it's encouraging because it's forcing conversations where there have been like a lot of barriers and divides before. Like the kind of harm reduction that I do a lot of times with festival goers and whatnot is totally separate from the harm reduction that happens with like opioid using community. But if we can say anything positive is coming out of like the scare around fentanyl and the carfentanil and the analogs, it's just that it's changing the conversation. Like the festival going community needs to be so much more aware of like opioid overdose And the opioid overdose, like harm reduction community is starting to need to be aware of drug checking as like a harm reduction practice that applies to them. So, I mean, it's really risky and terrible and dangerous, and people are dying, and that is bad. But I'm encouraged by the fact that like these new linkages are happening.
Right. Yeah. When we were chatting with Mitchell Gomez from Dance Safe, he was like, "It's a new era of drug use." He's like, "The fentanyl showing up in drugs that like just don't make any sense." So yeah, it's kind of scary that stuff's happening. And yeah, I agree because I live out in New Jersey, and I know countless there's a close group of friends that have passed from this, and it's like it's hit out there, and so a lot of the parents are talking about it and are more open to having conversation that I never thought I would be having with some folks just about drug use in general. But yeah, so I think it's definitely opening up more drug conversation with this epidemic that's happening.
And with festival producers in particular, like Canada has like kind of been the frontier for this. Like, and if you talk about festival environments, there's a couple that now allow naloxone, like because there was a whole kerfuffle over like you can't bring naloxone into the event because of course, and going into any event they restrict your prescribed drugs or anything that they don't know what it is, right? But in Canada, they were like, we literally have an overdose crisis going on, and like you have no idea who could be using an opioid, and like I want to carry my naloxone and help save somebody's life, like it seems obvious. But it took a step or two for the festivals to be like, oh yeah, I guess this is something that we should allow for. Because like a lot of festivals are still like, oh well, heroin, opioids, that's not our scene. Like we don't need to worry about that, And it's like, actually, increasingly, you really do.
Yeah, because it's everywhere.
Yeah. And like, not only that, but it's like, maybe it's not at your festival. Maybe these people leave and they go somewhere afterwards. But the idea is, if you have somebody who wants to carry naloxone, let them carry naloxone. Like, there's no reason. I get it because, sometimes with the intramuscular where you have the syringe, there's like a public safety concern.
Yeah.
But like, so I think that was ultimately what the festival decided. They were like, you can have the nasal spray naloxone, but you can't have the syringe. I'm like, all right, that seems like a reasonable compromise for like a festival with thousands of people, and you have to think about public safety. But to not allow it at all it just doesn't seem like a viable.
Really strange.
Yeah, just you can't be doing that in these days and age, like in festival environment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and some people are kind of against it. I don't know if like you've heard people say this, but I don't know. Sometimes I always hear this out where I'm from. It's like, well, they're using drugs, like let them die, and it's just like, oh my God, seriously, like,
who hurt you?
Yeah.
Who hurt you, sir? That you believe that?
It's like
that's that's tough, man. Yeah. That's a lot of what you get at. Hopefully, not that harsh, but in terms of both doing the safer partying work and the safety first work, the entry point is that you have to understand and embrace harm reduction. Like you have to know what it's for and what it's about. And like if you're coming at it with this whole idea of like, well, drug users should die, it's like, all right, we got some work to do before we get you to like accept harm reduction. We have to first address this like stigma and kind of like hate.
I think that's like one of I was reading somewhere, maybe it was on the site, there was like 4 goals of this, and one was like not to hate people that use drugs or just change the perception.
That was on my Safer Partying website. So it's like one of the goals is actually addressing the stigma around drug use. It's like you may not choose to use drugs ever or right now or tonight, but like if somebody does, like, don't hate them. Don't hate on them. Like just, we all want to be safe. And in terms of the safer partying work, it's like we're all out to have a good time, and we need to like facilitate that happening. Ultimately, you want everybody to be educated and to be able to make the smartest choices possible. And so that's like really what it's about. And that's actually convincing. Like when I talk to people at festivals, they, some people come up and they see this stuff. Oh, I don't do any of this. I'm like, that's cool. Please take this and give it to a friend who does. Like, because you absolutely know somebody who could use this information. And like, you might be that person who stops somebody from making a really dumb choice.
Yeah. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but what were the other 3 that were on there?
For safer partying in particular, so there's the one around ending stigma. There's another goal around promoting like accurate, honest drug education and harm reduction services, which is definitely in progress with all the publications and festival work. There is a third goal around just having drug checking available and accessible, like basically everywhere we can possibly make it available and accessible. And then a fourth goal is around policy reform, of course. Like ultimately, the one major policy reform that would make so much of drug education and harm reduction possible is decriminalizing all drugs. It's like when we stop arresting people and punishing people simply for possessing a drug, all of a sudden all these things become possible. And like drug checking among them. But like,
yeah, look at Boom.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen that documentary, What's My Baggie? I think that was at Boom Festival, or maybe it was somewhere else over there.
I think What's in My Baggie was in California festivals.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, but Boom is great. And I have been lucky to attend one time. And it's just amazing, like to see the drug checking in action and people like line up for it and the conversations that happen. I mean, my friends here in Dance Safe know them as well. And anybody who's ever done it under the table or like whatever can see the same reaction. But there's a difference when it's like out there in the open.
Right. Yeah, it just makes so much sense because if you brought something up there and you knew it turned out to be something else, you wouldn't even engage in that. Well, maybe you would. I don't know, depending what it was and what your risk tolerance is like. You know, yeah, I want to maybe do that. But we had somebody on, James Casey, who was doing some drug testing out on the Boulder University. And he said when, you know, I guess he got some results back and then they banned it because it was just like, no, can't do that here. But he said, I think it was around 40% of the LSD that got tested and like the results turned out to be some sort of research chemical, and then said, I think around 88% of the MDMA turned out tested positive for meth.
Yeah.
Which is
or cathinones or something.
Yeah.
No, it's totally true. And it changes people's whole perceptions when they know that they can like get information like this. And like there's some people that say like for MDMA users example, like there's some like older folks that are like, oh, young people don't even know what MDMA is. All they've had is like cathinones and all this other crap their whole lives. They think that's MDMA and they've never even had the real experience. Like how would you know if you haven't tested it? So I'm like a gospel of like drug checking. I'm like to all my friends, I'm like, have you heard the good news? There is a way that you can find out some information about this.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to talk about.
Do you think like, how easy is that to get done in festival scenes? I mean, how much like progress do you think we need to make to be able to kind of do open drug checking? Would it have to just be decriminalization, you think? Or
that's a good question. In the US, it feels pretty far in a lot of places. Like I know that there are some festivals that kind of let it happen under the table and whatnot. But to do it above board and publicized feels pretty far away. But we know that it's happening in other places, in other countries, and we can always point to those as an example. And again, like I just think that the opioid overdose crisis is changing the whole conversation about the need for this.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting in the US, it might not actually happen at festivals first, but another thing that DPA is promoting and pushing hard behind is supervised consumption spaces. So for opioid users to like, primarily opioid users, but really like across the board, to have a space to go. They get their drugs somewhere else, they bring them in, they use them there. If they overdose, somebody can, administer naloxone, and then all of a sudden we've prevented like all these deaths.
Yeah.
Good news. So the idea behind integrating drug checking into those, it's just kind of at the beginning of that type of conversation to see if it makes sense. But that's an idea, right? Because one of the concerns around opioid use is there fentanyl in it or some analog? And it's like, well, other communities that are using drugs that have concerns about analogs or whatever in the mix as well. So if we're able to successfully push for these spaces, having a legitimate drug checking space within those could be a possibility that happens sooner than drug checking at festivals.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one quick question. I know we got to wrap up pretty soon. How do you talk to parents about harm reduction? Without, I'm sure some parents are probably pretty resistant to it. And maybe don't really get it or think it's kind of like, you're just doing drug education and showing some positive results.
Yeah. Well, I personally haven't had a super lot of interactions with parents yet. So I'm channeling the founder and sort of an originator of the Safety First work, Marsha Rosenbaum. And she just goes immediately to the issue of safety. It's like, do you want your kids to come home after they go out? Do you want your kids to not get in car accidents or end up in, who knows where? Like, ultimately, we know you don't want your teenager to use drugs, but if they do, like, wouldn't you rather have them know these things that are going to help keep them safe rather than they're all of a sudden out there on their own if they don't have the right information or tools available to them?
What is anything exciting coming up with DPA? I know you guys just had that big conference down in Atlanta, was it?
Yeah, we had the Reform Conference. What is coming up exciting? Oh my gosh.
Obviously this teen program.
Yeah, the pilot is super exciting. As far as the next steps with that, like, we're going to get the data back and make some revisions and changes to it. It's basically like a first draft. We got to see how it does out there in the classrooms. 14-year-olds are vicious. They will definitely let us know what works and doesn't work.
Yep.
So, but another thing that's coming up is, like, I think we will be testing it again in the fall in the Bay Area.
Cool.
In San Francisco schools. So that's super exciting. I'm actually excited with the safer partying work. I've produced a publication that's like how to recognize an overdose and has some harm reduction information, but it doesn't talk about psychedelics. So actually, I'm hoping to expand what we have available and have a piece that's specifically focused on psychedelics, explaining what they are and safer use practices, a little bit of the elements of peer support, so that people can have access to that information, like quick, easy, digestible information about psychedelics. So those are the things related to my particular work I'm excited about. One other thing I'll say is that we're just about to send, like, I don't know, a bunch of our staffers and our partner organizations and some media representatives to Portugal.
Ooh.
Yeah. A week-long trip to Portugal to check out what decriminalization looks like in action, and like to see just how it works on the ground, and like give that like lived experience of this is how we make it work.
I think that's a wonderful idea, because Joe and I, the other host who's not here today, like, we always talk about that. And then we had somebody comment on our thread. They're like, well, it's not all as cracked up to be, living there. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what you guys come back with.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely limitations, right? Like, Portugal's a small country, and it's very like homogenous in terms of race and generally. So it's not exactly comparable to the United States. I think we all know that, and definitely there are challenges. But in terms of completely removing drug use from the criminal system and building a whole like placing it within the health system, public health system, I mean, there's no comparison. So like, even if we go there and we're like, sort of making notes about what doesn't work, we have a lot to bring back about like what does work. And then we'll need to make changes about how this applies within the US, like no matter what. So I think it's really promising and really exciting opportunity.
I'm
so amazed by my colleagues that put this together and sending all these people over there and putting the trip together. It's a lot of work. So I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Awesome. And any last things that you want to throw out there, like if places that people should check out or just anything?
Well, I hope that if people are into it, especially for the safer partying work, and they're on Twitter, that they follow me at MusicFanDPA, because I'm putting out information and new stuff all the time related to that work.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. And I don't know. I feel like we could probably keep going on, but I know you have some meetings and stuff. So
yeah, great conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Bluebird Botanicals for sponsoring the show. Really appreciate them. They are independently lab tested, so you can go on their site to check out the purity ratings and to see if there's any impurities that you might not want. spoiler alert, there are not any impurities you're not going to want in there. They're a really high-end company, and I really, really trust them and appreciate what they're doing to move the future of CBD as supplement forward. Yeah, I have to be careful with the language there because DEA is always watching. Same with the FDA. But yeah, CBDs are wonderful. They're non-psychoactive, and I find them very helpful personally. Jury's still out clinically, but do some research. You owe it to yourself to at least read up on CBDs generally, and then to also read up on Bluebird more specifically. So again, if you want to join us in Jamaica, please let us know. We'd love to have you. The retreat is from May 16 through 23, a little over a month away. We are very excited and can't wait. There's going to be 3 mushroom sessions, 2 breathwork sessions, and a lot of time spent talking, community, and learning together. So definitely would love to have you. To learn more, go to mycomeditations.com. And if you want to support us and don't have the spare funds right now, tell your friends about psychedelics today, or listen to all our episodes. Let us know what you think. We'd love to have some feedback on that. And even better for us might be reviews on iTunes or Facebook or Google or Stitcher, whatever podcast app you're using. We'd just love to have more feedback. And if you want to get in touch with us, the email is psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all for listening to the show, and hope you tune in again for the next one.